Hey everyone, yes, I know the Galaxy S22 phones have been released, but mine doesn't come for at least another week and a half. So I'm going to try to wrap up some of these other camera comparisons like this one between the S21 FE and the standard S21. We're going to see if the FE can keep up with its bigger brother, so to speak. And they both pretty much have very similar camera systems with the standard triple camera system on the rear. You got your standard wide, ultra wide, and telephoto lenses. Main difference being that the standard S21 has the larger telephoto sensor, but the FE is capable of doing 3 times optical zoom, and the S21 does a 3 times hybrid zoom. So we're going to test out the cameras and see if any of these differences matter and how they compare. Also, both these phones support portrait video, so you can see this artificial background blur going on right now, and this is at setting 3 of 7 because the higher you go, it starts to look a little bit too fake and artificial. But it's pretty nice that they're adding this, and in good lighting conditions, as you can see, it actually looks pretty good here. So portrait video is available on both these phones. Also, the FE's front-facing cameras are not stabilized at 4K, which is why this is being shot at 1080p on the FE. But just a quick final note, a lot of the day photos I took 2 shots, one in auto mode and one in pro mode, so you can see what it looks like in pro mode, which tends to strip away a lot of the over processing that people, or some people, don't really like. So if you don't like Samsung's color science, pro mode, even if you don't adjust any settings, is a pretty good option for you. Also, I really like pro mode because I can control the exposure a lot better, especially in really sunny days that we have here in California. So it can be a definitely handy tool there. But go ahead and take a look at all the photos and videos for yourself and let me know what you think. So here's a rear video test of the S21 FE and standard S21. As you can see, they are both recording from the rear facing cameras right now. And this is the ultra wide angle lens to start on each, and the max resolution and frame rate on each, which is 4K 30 frames per second on the FE and 4K 60 on the standard S21 with this ultra wide angle lens. So I'm just going to pan around to give you a feel for how these ultra wide angle cameras compare here. Alright, so we're back with the main lenses on each here, and I still have the directional audio pointing towards me on the standard S21. Again, the FE does not have the directional audio feature, so pay attention to that. I'm just going to pan around here to give you a feel for how these main cameras look here side by side in this particular setting. So pay attention to things like color reproduction, exposure, etc. And again, they're both at 4K 60 frames per second here. We'll pan over to the right and we'll test zoom here on that cell tower. So we can move into a 3x zoom here on the S21 FE. And then we can move into the same 3x zoom here on the standard S21. And focus isn't so great at 4K 60 on the FE from what I noticed. So we can go to that max 10x zoom that's supported at 4K 60. This can go to 12x at 4K 30, and it's going to look a lot clearer. For some reason, digitally zoomed in, 4K 60 doesn't look so good on the FE. And same here on the standard S21. So a little bit better on the S21, but still not great. I think it definitely looks better at lower resolutions as far as that zoom goes. But let's go ahead and back this out to standard 1x here on each. And we'll go ahead and test focus here on the post. So focused up pretty quickly with the FE. One more time. So pretty quick and snappy autofocus with the FE and now with the standard S21. And let's go ahead and test stabilization as we walk down the pathway here. So you can see what that looks like here side by side at 4K 60 frames per second. And let's go ahead and jog to try to stress these things out a little bit. And we'll pull up here and point out up at the sky so you can see how these cameras handle the changing lighting conditions here. Here's a quick clip at 4K 30 on both of the main cameras here. This is in full auto mode, so you can see things are pretty overexposed, especially in the green leaves here in the bushes, and it lifts up the shadows here in the trees a lot better, but everything is kind of looking a lot more overexposed with this harsh afternoon light. And I'll go ahead and do a quick zoom on that cell tower so you can see what I mean by, a little bit clearer zoom here on 4K 30. So that's at 3x, and then if you go to the max 12x, this is what that looks like here on each. And you can see a lot clearer here at 4K 30. Although I don't know why it's so shaky on the standard S21. But a lot clearer on the digital zoom there at 30 frames per second than it was at 60. So let's go ahead and switch over to Pro mode so you can see the difference between the exposure between Auto and Pro. So here are in Pro mode on the main cameras. I just want to give you a difference for what that looks like between that Auto mode. You can see things are a lot more well controlled as far as exposure. It's not overexposed. There's going to be more shadow in certain parts, like in those trees and in those bushes. But that's kind of how it actually looks in real life. You can see the Auto mode is really trying to lift everything up. And because of that, everything gets way more overexposed. So here's an example of what you can do to control things a little bit more in Pro mode. Alright, so here's a low light video test of the Galaxy S21 FE and standard S21. This is the ultra wide angle lens on each at 4K 30 frames per second. So I'm just going to pan around to give you a feel for how these ultra wide angle lenses compare side by side here. And let's go ahead and try to move into the main lens now. So one tap on the S21 FE, and let's go one tap on the S21. So there you go, main lens on each. And of course, as most main lenses, they pick up more light, so you can see the picture brighten up immediately. You can see those trees clearly against the skyline there when they're blended it more into it with the ultra wide angle cameras, and that's how these main cameras look against that really bright street light there. The FE may be flaring out a bit more there, but let's go ahead and pan this way, and we'll go ahead and start walking to test the stabilization. But like I always do, we'll test out different lighting conditions. So that was obviously some pretty good light back there. want to be able to show you what these cameras can do in some fairly good light. And as you move this way, it's going to get much darker, so we'll see how it does in a much more difficult lighting conditions. Also check out the micro jitters as you walk. That's common for stabilization in low light. And as around the corner, it's much darker, but both these cameras are trying to brighten up the scene much more than what I'm seeing here with my own eyes. You can see a bit of noise because of that. And we'll stop here and pan up. And again, there's some light pollution here, so it's not completely pitch black, but you can see some of the noise being introduced by the cameras trying to brighten things up a little bit. And we'll pan over here to the left, down this darker alleyway. We've got some lights coming off the building, so a little bit of a mixed light situation, so you can see how these cameras handle that. So there's your low light video test in 4K on both phones.
Downtown, I got that heat, let's go.
Hey everyone, so here's a low light test from the front facing cameras on the Galaxy S21 FE and standard S21. This is at 4K 30 frames per second on each. They both can record up to 4K 60 frames per second, but that will look much darker here in this particular setting. So this is 4K 30 and the FE is not stabilized at 4K, but I want to show you this so you can see what 4K footage looks like from both of the front facing cameras here in this particularly fairly well lit area. You can see the lights to the right, to the left of me, so pretty good lighting. I want to show you what these front facing cameras can do at a fairly high resolution in some fairly optimal light. So let's go ahead and switch into 1080p on the FE and test some stabilization. Hey, so we're back at 1080p on the S21 FE. It is now stabilized. You can see much more crop for that stabilization now on the FE versus the standard S21, which is stabilized but has that wider field of view, which is nice. So let's go ahead and start walking to test that stabilization so you can see what that looks like here side by side from these front facing cameras. And we'll also walk over to a little bit more difficult lighting situation, a little bit more challenging light for these cameras so you can see what it looks like here as it gets darker. And I also have a water fountain here to my right so we can test out the microphones and what that audio quality is against that background noise. And if we pull up here, we can pan all the way around and you can see what these front facing cameras look like here into those bunch of street lights behind me. And overall, from what I can see, not too bad really, and really not too much noise as well from what I can see in the viewfinder. And if you move over here into this more difficult light, a little bit darker area here, you can see what that looks like here side by side. And still, not as much noise or grain that I see on other front-facing cameras, although I'm sure there is some, but not looking too bad here considering. So that's going to do it for this camera comparison between the Galaxy S21 FE and standard S21. Let me know what your thoughts are, if you felt that the FE kept up with its bigger brother here, the S21. And I really thought there was going to be more gap for me personally. For photos, I thought the FE kept up pretty well, especially if you put into pro mode. You get more control, plus I think it actually does fairly well against the standard S21. As far as video, pretty close there too as well. Just maybe some more features on the S21, such as 4K stabilization from the front-facing camera on the S21, and which the SE doesn't have, and maybe 4K 60 frames per second support in the ultra-wide camera on the standard S21. But other than that, I thought the FE did very well, kept up pretty well, considering some of the price differences, although I know there are sales on the standard S21. But I was just curious about how big of a gap there would be in the camera performance between these phones, and I thought you might be too. So let me know what you think, and which one you thought you liked better in the comment section below. And if you have any other questions I can help answer about any of these two phones, leave it as a comment as well, and I'll try to get to what I can. As always, thanks for watching.